Right, I've got John Broome here. So we're delighted to have John here. He's CEO of the Association of Australian National Advertisers, AANA, and I'm sure pretty much all of you in the room know John. He also, prior to that, he's only been there, 15 months now, about? 18 months now, yeah? Prior to that, 25-year marketing career, which took in the likes of Unilever, Kellogg's, Nestle, Reckitt. So a marketer himself, and now with this interesting and possibly difficult role of being able to prioritise things on behalf of many of you. So we're going to have a few minutes with John. We'll see if we can get a question or two as well, if anybody wants to ask things, and we're just going to canter through a few topics. So, I mean, let's start off with that you've come out of brands. So in your brand career, did things change enormously in terms of what was your priority as a marketer?
I think for many marketers in the room, the first response would be, yes, things have got far more complex. But I think the fundamentals of marketing, what we do, why we're there, the purpose of our profession haven't changed. And I think it's important that we all remember that. I think, yes, we've got a new task of making the complex simple, and as the old phrase goes, making the simple very compelling, particularly to stakeholders in the leadership room who are, at the end of the day, co-signing off that investment that we're putting behind our brands. But we, as a profession, we all know that we tend to get very attracted to the bright, shiny, and new, and we kind of like lean in that direction for a while, and that sometimes can jeopardize what truly is important when it comes to delivering on those fundamentals.
Do you think we're still over-leaning?
Yes.
Considerably?
No, I think it's getting better. I think we are starting to see a maturing out and more of, and I think it's led through the lens of effectiveness and ROI. We're actually getting a better understanding of how we optimize our choices, how we optimize our mix, and what delivers the best outcome, not just in terms of the short-term outcome, but also the long-term sustainability of the business. And balancing those two is absolutely critical.
And presumably failing to balance those two has a huge impact on the brand brand advertising. And when you were working in the marketing field, were you starting to see that? Were you starting to be concerned? Were your bosses concerned about that?
Look, I think let's just draw our attention to what happened last week in the US. Kraft Heinz basically saw their share price drop by over 50% since 3G acquired that business, and basically through an efficiency focus, driving out cost at all vigor, have basically undermined shareholder value. And that's an extreme case of what happens. But at the time when 3G were buying companies, there was a lot of fear going around other FMCGs at the time around, oh my God, they're coming for us. Let's do the same. And I think at that point in time, there is a risk that we see the undermining of brand value. At the end of the day, after your people, perhaps your factories or your plants, your systems, your brands are the next biggest asset on your balance sheet. The driver of that shareholder decline was impairment. So basically the brands were no longer worth what they were stated for on the balance sheet.
On the shiny and new, so as you know, we ran this conference in London a little while ago, and there are numerous effectiveness studies, we mentioned effectiveness there, kicking around, particularly from what you might call the sort of traditional media, or some people now call proven media side of things. And despite those, the print guys particularly just see money just seeping away to social, obviously, so Facebook and Google, with their own version of metrics. Does that really concern you? Do you see that as well? Actually, how do you see we're going to do anything about that, or are we not? Is it just inevitable?
Yes, we can do something about it. I think it's going to be born out of the frustration that I think most marketers in the room have here today about competing claims around effectiveness. Marketers want one version of the truth. And I don't think we're anywhere close to that at this point in time. That said, I think the level of understanding around effectiveness is getting stronger. And of course, it's directly proportional to the ability for you to pay and to access the technology and the systems to actually measure effectiveness. But also you have to draw a distinction between what is long-term effectiveness from short-term effectiveness. You've actually got to have both. And if you listen to the likes of Ritson and crew, they're basically saying that the balance should be 60% long-term, 40% short-term. Now, whether that's right for you, in your particular circumstances, that's for you to decide. But clearly, effectiveness is the new metric in the boardroom. It's what justifies what we do to the rest of the leadership room.
Yeah, except it isn't a metric, so it is tricky, isn't it?
It is tricky, and look, what might be right as a metric for me with my leadership group might be different for you.
Yeah. So Peter Miller's equivalent in the UK is called Newsworks, and they win numerous awards for their effectiveness research, and watch the revenues disappear from print.
Yeah, but there's many reasons for that, and I will say this as well, that the online platforms have been amazingly enabling to small businesses. The threshold of cost of getting into traditional media, other than print classifieds, of course, is very high. So for small businesses to actually now be able to connect with consumers, not only here in Australia but worldwide, is a good thing.
Sure. I think it's not so much about what works as you say, getting the balance of what works. So you probably have to work to sensible consensus view in your role with all your many many companies that are part of the AANA. What are the current priorities? What's the focus for you at the moment? What's the 2 or 3 main areas?
So we're obviously here to drive value for our members and represent their interests. And 3 pithy words I'd put out there. 1 is transparency, 2 is trust, and 3 is return. I think we've covered the return dimension fairly well. I think transparency, there's still an ongoing task to deliver around transparency throughout the ecosystem that we live in. And it's a wonderful ecosystem, let's not deny that. But in the sense of having one system of measurement, for example, one measure of reach, this would be dramatically enabling to marketers and would really be able to allow their planning to be far more effective and then obviously connect through to that ROI. Trust, I mentioned trust not so much in terms of trust within the marketing supply chain, but trust in brands. And I think there's a lot said about purpose. There's a lot said about authenticity and finding that authentic way to connect with consumers. I suspect where we're going, because of the undermining of trust in a lot of our institutions, which all have brands, is that the next step is really to actually interrogate the culture of your organization. Is everything that you do and you genuinely reflect into your business, as part of your culture, then reflected outwardly, to your consumers? Is it a genuine connection? Now, clearly, some big challenges with some institutions. There seems to be a different institution in the news every day.
Yep.
But I think it's not just about coming up with another campaign, and putting it out there to tell consumers, you can trust us. Because if you're not actually acting like that within your business and with your people, then you're doing one thing and saying another.
And going back to the other point you were making, then single measurement of reach.
Yeah.
Is that? I mean, everybody'd love to have that.
Yeah.
Is that achievable?
So this has been obviously discussed on and off as the Holy Grail for some time. My belief, from what I see, particularly from overseas, and also from what I'm hearing through some sources within our own market, is that technically we're on the cusp of being able to deliver this.
Right.
And I think my appeal to the marketeers in the community and also the media agencies in the room is, we need to agitate for this, because unless we demand it as the demand generation side of the supply chain in which we live in, then there will be no change. And I think there are great examples of it now up and coming overseas. Great example going on in Holland, of all places, where all the different industry associations have come together to form a body and have put an RFP into some global suppliers, GfK, Nielsen, etc., to deliver, what I'm talking about earlier, one measure of reach. So that would then enable your media agency to subscribe to that. Ultimately, we pay, as we know, and to be able to come back to you and present you a plan on a page. Now, maybe I'm talking idealistically. Maybe this is an iterative process over time. But the possibility of fusing together different databases and panels across the media spectrum is real. It's now. And I think we just need to wake up to this opportunity.
Maybe the Dutch are just forward-thinking or less competitive.
Yeah, look, I think they're a bit of both, maybe. Yeah. But I mean, there are examples in Japan. There's other examples in the States. There's projects underway in the UK. The AANA is a member of the World Federation of Advertisers, so we get to share and listen to what is going on globally around measurement systems. And indeed, some of the big advertisers here in Australia are also members of the WFA. So this is our forum to drive change.
And just finally on that point, though, to get that, though, Facebook in particular would actually have to open up a bit, wouldn't they, to be part of that?
And look, here's the good news. I've had conversations with both major platforms, and both of them are leaning into this. They're being very proactive. They say, John, we want to be part of this. Now, obviously, the devil's in the detail. We've got to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, they're leaning into paying a bit of tax as well.
Well, no, I'm actually genuine about this. Yeah. I'm not joking about it. And I think... if they weren't, that would be a major hurdle to overcome. But the fact that they are, and indeed, what we term as the traditional media have often said, no, we won't. We're reluctant to do that because the new media guys won't. Well, guess what? The new media guys are saying they're happy to talk about this. So then, therefore, why don't we come together as an industry to try and solve it?
It would be the holy grail, absolutely.
It would be.
So
yeah, absolutely.
Terrific. Anybody got a question for John on anything we've covered so far? We have microphones in the room now, so. You don't have to shout. Any questions? Yes, the lady down here. Just hang on 1 second, we'll get you a microphone. And you can tell us who you are as well, so we know if you've got a vested interest in anything.
Oh, hi, I'm Jodie from oMedia. More from a marketer's perspective, just you talk about the big three things that are on marketers' minds. What's the conversation you're having that you want to stop having?
It's the inefficient conversations. I think anything that drives needless complexity for advertisers and marketers from the supply side, we just want to stop. I also think whereas clearly advertisers are invested in what Google and Facebook offer us as a mix opportunity, making sure that we have a level playing field, that the quality of the consumer experience is absolute, then I think that's great. If we get distractions around brand safety or privacy, then that adds complexity for marketers.
Thank you. There's a lot of talk that, and we're going to get onto that in the next session a bit, that the agency model is broken. If it is, I'll get your view on that just briefly. Do clients share some of the blame for that, or do we just all lump all the blame onto procurement people?
Really great question, and I know there's a panel coming up on this.
So I'm going to
set them up a little bit.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So look, I think the agency world would also agree that the agency model is broken, and what they're particularly keen for is that the value they create is reflected in the remuneration that we as advertisers pay them. And at the moment, as you know, it's basically a head hours based model. Yeah. So yes, the current model is broken. And I think whilst there is nothing obvious to take its place, it becomes very easy for procurement, for example, and we we all, deal with that tension internally, to come and, attack and nibble away at the old model and the margins that are there. So I think it's actually incumbent upon the agency world to actually come up with a better alternative and tell us what that is, make us an offer. And I think, the AANA stands ready to work with the agencies to enable that, to make that happen, to give feedback, to offer guidelines to advertisers, options. And I think, because I think the marketer and the agency, where we have the same agenda is that we want to create value, value for brands at the end of the day. And if we then have a strong model, and then can go back to procurement and say, this is not just about reducing cost, right? This is about creating value for the company. Then it becomes a more balanced discussion. It doesn't come about, just the lowest fee that we can get away with or similar options.
Okay, well, we'll leave it to Rob and his panel to pick up a little bit on that. We did a little bit in London. We had a session around pitching, pricing and procurement.
Yeah.
And the woman who was representing the procurement side of it broadly said in the end that she just doesn't trust any of the agencies, which made obviously the conversation and any chance of moving on from there quite tricky. Quite tricky, it has to be said, really.
Yeah.
She's very good. She also said they describe it as a tender process, not a pitching process, to which our response was there was nothing tender about that process at all. But anyway. Right, so last few minutes we've got, John, but what's coming over the horizon, do you think, for marketers that they may not even have heard of, or they just may possibly more likely just not paying a lot of attention to as yet?
Difficult question. I mean, obviously, I'm very keen on that cross-channel media measurement thing. I think that is most probably within reach on a 1 to 3 year time frame. I think that's what we should be focusing our energies on. I would like to think that the maturing of the, let's put it another way. Everything is becoming digitized now. It's no longer about whether you're a digital marketer or a non-digital marketer. Everything is digitized. So I do subscribe to this thing about how actually, if you're called a digital marketer, you might want to change your title because you could become obsolete quite quickly.
Well, somebody once said that nobody's called an analog marketer,
That's
are
right,
they really?
that's right.
So
yeah, and you didn't in the 1970s or whatever it was have a head of TV marketing. Marketing goes through waves of technological change, and I think and we can't predict precisely what future waves are going to be, but I think what we need to do, and this perhaps goes to the conversation around the digital platforms inquiry, is that we shouldn't just fix the apparent problem in the here and now. Because guess what? In 2 or 3 years' time, when the next thing comes along, it's most probably going to be redundant or adding a whole heap of complexity. So, we've got to be really careful about, superimposing regulatory systems on top of existing frameworks. Instead, you could look at existing frameworks like, the Privacy Act, the Competition Act, consumer law, and so forth, and say, okay, how do we actually upgrade those for the world that we live in now? So, and leave us the door open to be able to continuously future-proof them as new waves of unknown come through. And I think that's a more sustainable long-term approach than reinventing the wheel every time something comes up.
John, I should point out for those who don't know, is a Yorkshireman by birth. Just about by birth, he explained to me a few minutes ago, but he is a Yorkshireman. So Yorkshire is a country within England. It's sort of its own empire. And it's best known for its cricket players. So anybody who follows cricket from years back, there was a Yorkshire batsman called Jeff Boycott. And Jeff Boycott dead batted everything. He just blocked everything and he batted all day because that's the way you should play cricket if you're Jeff Boycott. And he played like that. So this Yorkshireman, I think, moved in time. He's not dead batting things today, so I'm very grateful for that. I've got just about time for one more question if anybody wants to ask another question. Okay, all right. Well, I'll do it then. So I looked you up on LinkedIn first off when we got to talk, and it says on there, you're a strong believer in the maxim of sales today, brands forever. So we're talking about the future of brands today. What are just a couple of things you think brands need to do most to have a rosy future?
Yeah. And look, I can't claim to have authored that pithy statement. It's actually a Y&R mantra.
I thought it was yours.
No, sadly
Oh,
not.
God.
But when I first came across it a few too many years ago, it really rang true for me because really what it does for me encapsulate this balance that we've constantly got to do between delivering results in the short term versus fostering brands for the future as an asset, and also just make sure that as a marketer you don't end up too head in the clouds, that your feet are firmly on the floor when it comes to the commercial reality of the organisation you're in. Now, I don't think that's an issue for the vast majority of marketers in the room today, but there have been periods of time, when we were talking about brand love and kind of esoteric concepts like that, we tended to err too far the other way. So it's all about balance.
Okay, there we go. Sound advice. John Broome, thank you very much.
Thank you.